Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 35 deadline decisions where I'll discuss your final questions and dilemmas before the deadline, including benching decisions, chip strategy for those that have chips remaining, and also captaincy as well. If you enjoyed today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, just a little bit of housekeeping before we move on to discussing the juicy stuff such as benching, captaincy, taking hits and chip strategy as well. The Premier League finally announced that we will have no double Game Week 36 and no blank Game Week 37. So as we've discussed for a while now, the FA Cup final clashes with the fixtures in Game Week 37. So the game between Crystal Palace and Wolves and between Man City and Bournemouth, it had to move. Both of them had to move from the weekend of Game Week 37. They had two options. They could move them to the midweek of Game Week 36, causing a double game week in 36, or they could move them after the FA Cup final to the midweek of Game Week 37. They chose the latter, which makes the most sense, right? They don't want to be playing these games just before the FA Cup final. But what that means for FPL, and again, FPL have confirmed this, is that there are no remaining doubles and blanks as a result. So what we essentially have now is just a 4 single game week shootout, 4 single game weeks in a row. It makes it a lot easier to plan. In all honesty, I think it makes it easier to differentiate, because if we had these doubles, well, then everyone's just going to pile in on the likes of Cunha, Brian, like a Clive or an even Nielsen, like everyone would have bought the same players. Now that every team just has 4 single game weeks, I think you can be a lot more different with it. And even with things like captaincy as well, you're not forced into captaining a double game week player. So I don't necessarily mind this. I think the only people that this doesn't really benefit is those that have saved a free hit or saved assistant manager, and as a result, you're getting less value from holding those chips. Maybe even those of you that saved the wildcard as well, it has less value now because Game Week 36 and 37 are much easier to navigate. What this also means is that Crystal Palace and Manchester City will be playing the FA Cup final on the Saturday, and then they'll be playing this game in the Premier League on the Tuesday. So we might see rotation quite heavily for those two teams because there's not much of a turnaround between the FA Cup and their game in the midweek of Game Week 37. So I'll leave it there. No blanks, no doubles, but still lots of fun to have in the final 4 weeks. So guys, I'm recording this very late on Thursday evening, ready for a Friday morning upload, and the reason for that is it's a Friday deadline. So make sure to tune into the Friday deadline stream, 2 hours before the deadline. Make sure to not miss the deadline as well, because it is Man City as the early kickoff, and we may well get early team news, as well as obviously answering your questions as well. So tune into that. But yes, I'm recording this after the Manchester United game. It couldn't have gone much better, in all honesty. Like, if I was to just think what would the perfect result be, a 3-0 margin away. Now, a massive slice of luck with the red card and the penalty. However, Man United, even up to that point, were performing quite well. And obviously, you have to take the luck when you get it. Spurs, relatively dominant in that game. They really didn't give the opposition many chances. So both teams are carrying a winning margin into the second leg. You would expect both teams to progress. But the reason that I wanted to bring this up is these are the two teams to target in the Premier League. We are going to see mass rotation for them in Game Week 35. I'm not saying that they will rotate all 11 players. Like, would I be surprised if one of Ugarte or Casemiro start? No, because they kind of have to. Would I be surprised if Bruno gets a game? No, I wouldn't. Like, we can't, both teams just don't have the squad depth to rotate entirely. And maybe Manchester United would be less likely to rotate. I kind of just feel like Amorim hasn't given up on the league in the same way that Ange has. Not in terms of necessarily like the performances, but just the way he speaks about it. Like, I think Spurs have truly, like, well and truly given up on the Premier League. And also they've got a slightly smaller margin at the moment in terms of only 2 goals versus 3. But I expect both teams to rotate. So if you can buy Brentford assets this week against United, fantastic. Wissa and Mbeumo are brilliant. If you can buy the likes of Jared Bowen this week against Spurs, obviously go and do it. The reason I say United and Spurs are the teams to target, Ipswich, Southampton and Leicester and Everton, they're all just playing against each other. So it's very difficult to... There are no like teams that play both promoted teams that aren't also a promoted team, or at least a team that you don't want to target. Like, Everton are the only team, but are you buying Everton attackers? No. So if you can't really buy assets that play lots of the promoted teams in the final 4, buy players that face the likes of Spurs and Manchester United, because even after Game Week 35, I still would expect a bit of rotation. And we talk about motivation. There is very little. Even if we think that Amorim wants to finish the season strong and Ange wants to try and keep his job, whatever it is, they're still not going to do a massive amount because there is very little to play for. So yes, we definitely expect rotation. Maybe I would have expected slightly more rotation if they were losing going into the second legs, like 2-1, losing 2-1 because they need all of the energy. But I can't see. I think it would be silly for United or Spurs to put out a strong 11 in the Premier League. So yeah, all aboard Brentford and Spurs this week. And then going into 36 as well, I think we continue to target these two teams. And I should note, Jared Bowen and West Ham face Spurs this week in 35, and then they face United in 36. You literally get the double whammy 2 weeks in a row. Let me know if you're bringing in any of those three players in Burmo, Wissa, Bowen. I'd like to own all three this week. So guys, this is actually the second time I've recorded this section on captaincy, because the first time it was about 16 minutes and it was some of my worst work, in all honesty. It was very waffly, but that's because this is equally a very difficult decision this week, but also a very fun and exciting one. And it's one that I want to try and convey my opinion on as well as possible and help you. But it's also very difficult because when it is so close, it feels very much like you should make it based on vibes and gut feeling more than anything else. Because data, odds, projected points, it's telling us that it's all very, very similar this week. And that's why I'm very excited by captaincy this week. There aren't many times across the season where captaincy is so close in my eyes. Because even sometimes when there's like a 50-50 or three options to choose from, there's like three options that are separate from the rest. Like you could say, yeah, there's 10 captaincy options, but there's always 2 or 3 that are towards the top. I've got 8 options on your screen right now. I think they could be, if I was to like rate them out of 100, they'd be separated by like a couple of percent in terms of my ratings. I think they are genuinely that close. Like there is not much to separate any of the 8 on your screen. And there are players that I've had to omit here who are perfectly viable captaincy options as well that can't even fit on the graphic. The other reason, as well as it just being fun, and I don't think there is a real standout this week, is because all of our teams do look very similar, right? We all loaded up on 32 and 33 doubles. We then, a lot of us free hit in 34. A lot of us are coming back to very similar teams. If there's nowhere really to differentiate with our current 11s, captaincy is the place to do it. So I urge you to at least try and think independently this week. Don't do what you think a lot of other people are doing because there is a bit of a bandwagon forming for captaincy. Trust your gut feeling, trust what you believe, and feel free to go slightly different this week because whilst there will still be highly owned assets, there is not going to be one clear-cut captain that everyone goes for. If you do want to know what you should do if you're trying to protect rank and protect your mini-league, try and find out who your mini-league rivals are captaining, but definitely the most popular captain this week, without a shadow of a doubt, is Bryan Mbeumo. Off the back of his 18-pointer in 33, obviously blanked in 34, but United are going to rotate so heavily. Bryan Mbeumo just makes sense. He is probably the standout if you are to try and have one above the rest. Like if you're to select one player that stands out, Bryan Mbeumo is probably that guy. I just don't think there's enough of a margin to just all pile in on it and then not think about anyone else. But yes, he's got decent underlying numbers all year. If you look at bookies odds, 39% chance for goal is right up there amongst the rest. Projected points of 5.6. He's always on the pitch. He's on set pieces, he's on penalties. There is a lot to like about Bryan Mbeumo. What is there to potentially not like? Firstly, out of every option on this list, he's got the lowest goal threat across the last 10 game weeks. 0.19 non-penalty XG per 90. His goal threat is certainly from open play lower than all of the other options you can choose. However, he takes penalties, which is big, and his conversion rate, I believe, is still the second best in the league after Chris Wood. So he's finishing at a very high level this year as well, and he can finish really well from outside the box. So maybe the slightly lower open play goal threat doesn't matter as much, but he's also got the highest assist threat on this list as well. So I don't want to put you off massively just because he's got a slightly lower goal threat. But Man United have been defending a little bit better recently. And no, it's not because I'm a United fan and wearing a United shirt. But if you look at the data there, 1.23 XGC per 90 over the last 10 is not bad at all. It puts them about 12th in the Premier League. Across the last 6 game weeks, they are the 4th best defence in the league for expected goals conceded. Manchester United are starting to defend slightly better. Now, the caveat to that is the defence that has been doing quite well for us will not be the defence that starts probably against Brentford. Rather than Dorgu, it will be Harry Amas. Maybe Mazraoui will have to start again because Dalot is out. Maybe 1 or 2 of our first choice centre-backs will have to start. But at least one of Casemiro or Ugarte will get a rest. So that United defence and midfield is going to be weaker. And Brentford are big chance machines. They will create big chances against Man United. So great fixture, good underlying data. Love the penalties, love the set pieces, love the minutes. Bryan Mbeumo is a fantastic option this week. There is no denying it. But there are a few things which just suggest to me that again, I don't just want to blindly follow what a lot of other people are doing. And I think there are some really good alternatives. One really good alternative to Brian Mbeumo is Yohan Wissa. Yohan Wissa's data all season has been exceptional. He's very close behind Mbeumo for goals this season. He obviously scored himself in game week 34 too. When Brentford score, I think it's equally as likely to be Wissa that pops up with the goal than Mbeumo. We know he's good for bonus when he grabs the goal too. He's playing the same opponent. Like, if you do want to differentiate, but you still think that it is the fixture to target, go for Yohan Wissa. I really don't mind it if you have him in your team. So Wissa and Mbeumo do really stand out as two of the best options. The fixture for me, though, that stands out above and beyond Man United is actually the Spurs one. Because if you look across the last 10, Spurs are 17th for XGC per 90. You can see down at 1.53 XGC per 90. That is quite a significant gap to the likes of Wolves and Manchester United, who have also put up relatively weak underlying data defensively recently. So Spurs, for me, are hands down a weaker defence than Man United. The concern is that probably West Ham are a weaker attack than Brentford are. And if you look at Bowen's underlying numbers, both assist threat and goal threat are both like average. He doesn't stand out as being really creative or having loads of goal threat. He sort of does both okay. So 0.27 non-penalty XG per 90, 0.18 expected assists. Jarrod Bowen, though, is just so consistent. And I suppose that's the slight concern with captaincy. So Jarrod Bowen has only scored more than 10 points on 2 occasions this season, and both of them were 12-pointers. So he's never scored more than 12 points. He's never got 2 goals in a given game. So his ceiling feels quite low. But Jarrod Bowen has also not blanked for 3 consecutive games at any point this season. So Jarrod Bowen is very consistent, but up to this point, he's not shown us that Mbeumo Palmer-esque 18-plus pointer that we really do want from a captaincy option. So maybe I would say with Bowen, I'm not saying he can't blank, of course, but maybe a higher floor and a lower ceiling in comparison to someone like a Brian Mbeumo. Like, if one of them was to blank, I'd say it's more likely to be Mbeumo for me. I don't think Bowen will blank against Spurs, which is why I'm looking at him for the armband. But if you tell me one of them goes humongous, it is probably more likely to be Brian Mbeumo, because he has corners and set piece and penalties as well. Mbeumo can have a terrible game, get an assist from a corner and score a penalty, and he's come away with 14 points. But yes, the fixture to target for me is Spurs, then followed by United. So I think those 3 options are the 3 that you should be considering if you're purely targeting the fixture. I actually think Wolves is a better fixture than people are suggesting. So Marmoush and De Bruyne are captaincy options. You can see across the last 10 game weeks, they have a weaker defence than Man United, Wolves. So yes, there have been signs of improvement, but there's certainly not a watertight defence. And across that time, Wolves have had very kind fixtures. Since Vitor Pereira has come in, they've had the best fixtures in the Premier League. So yes, you would expect that their form would improve. Now, I'm not trying to discredit what Wolves have done, but you would expect City to dominate this game. You'd expect them to win by a couple of goals. And so Marmoush and De Bruyne are both great. Since De Bruyne has come into the 11, Marmoush has lost set pieces. So across the last 4 weeks, Marmoush has taken 1 corner. Kevin De Bruyne has taken 14 in that time. So Marmoush has lost set pieces, which obviously isn't great. So there's some negatives potentially, but the positives, he's got the greatest goal threat on this list. Since coming to the Premier League, his underlying data has been really strong. In the absence of Haaland, it's even increased slightly more. We do still expect him to be first choice penalty taker, even though we can't confirm that. And like I said, I expect Man City to score goals in this game, and it's at home. If you look at the bookies' odds, he's got the greatest chance of scoring a goal. So I still think Marmoush is a really good captaincy option. Maybe it's just, again, a little bit of vibes and gut feeling. Just something slightly put me off him towards the back end of this week. If you're watching this hoping that I'll put you off De Bruyne captaincy, I will not be doing that. I think Kevin De Bruyne is a genuinely fun captaincy option. If I had De Bruyne in my team, I think I would captain him. I think he would be, or he'd at least be right up there for me. Because when you're looking at explosive ability, De Bruyne can get you a double-digit haul from outside the box, from one pass and then a goal from 30 yards. Like, he has that ability. Like Bruno Fernandes doesn't even necessarily need to be in the box to get you returns. So if City put a few goals past Wolves, you're probably expecting Kev to be involved in it. Now, hopefully we get a leak before the deadline for those considering it to just confirm that he starts, because the fact that he didn't start the FA Cup, you might see that as, he's nice and rested, but he didn't come on at all in an FA Cup semi-final. I thought that was quite strange. So I would want confirmation that he starts to really be willing to risk that. And maybe you will get that on Friday evening. So I think both Marmoush and De Bruyne are great. Objectively on paper, Marmoush is a better captaincy option than Kevin De Bruyne. But in terms of vibes, again, De Bruyne is your guy. And I think you should play with a little bit of vibes towards the back end of the season. I would put Ollie Watkins and I'd put Ollie Watkins and Isak as sort of very similar FPL options this week and very similar captaincy options. They both have peak motivation, right? They are both want to continue to be the main men, the number 9s, the talisman for their team. And both Aston Villa and Newcastle have so much to play for. They've both got very similar underlying data. And Brighton and Fulham have very similar defensive data across the last 10. So if we're looking at the defenses they're playing, if we're having a look at underlying data, motivation levels, even the way they lead the lines, like we're looking at two very similar good captaincy options this week. And I think both of those, if I'll rank in a second, I'll maybe try to give a ranking, but they would both be in my top 5. I think for me, Isak and Watkins would be right up there. Isak probably, again, is objectively a slightly better option just because of the penalties. Like, Watkins is third choice penalty taker after Rashford, who, by the way, won't be on the pitch. And then Asensio, who might not be on the pitch. He's then in that group after that, along with Tielemans and McGinn. So he could take the next penalty, absolutely. But you don't have that confirmation, which, of course, makes me lean slightly more towards Alexander Isak. And I just think that Brighton, despite the data suggesting Brighton and Fulham are very similar, Brighton have been really weak recently. They're conceding like a couple of goals a game for the last 6 games now. They are just giving the opposition a lot of chances. I could see Newcastle come out the gate swinging here and score a lot of goals, but then I expect Villa to do the same at Villa Park. So really like Watkins and Isak. I mean, I'm just going through all these options and saying I love them. Salah I don't love as a captaincy option because it's like you finally got a chance to go against Mohamed Salah and he's not been performing at the same level. Now you might see this as he wants to break all the records. There is no pressure now. Liverpool won the league. They're just going to keep feeding the ball to Mo and hoping that he scores and gets assists. And maybe that's the case. Maybe Mo goes absolutely crazy across the final 4. It doesn't inspire me, right? And if you look at the data again, Chelsea, the only defence on this list, have less than 1 XGC per 90 over the last 10. Chelsea are a pretty decent defence. So I just don't think I could bring myself. But maybe this is the week to do it. Everyone's going to go against Salah. Maybe you just refer back to the GOAT of FPL and just stick it on the Egyptian King, potentially. I won't be doing that myself, though. I think I've discussed everyone on this list then. So to recap, fixtures is Wissa and Burmo Bowen, of course it is. I really do quite like the matchup for City and Wolves, and I expect there to be goals, so they're great. I think Isak and Watkins are really good as talismanic number 9s, and their teams have everything to play for. And then Salah is fine if you just don't fancy any of the other options. If I was to give you my top... Oh, this is going to be so difficult. Right, I'll give you objectively the top 3 if I was just trying to give you good advice, and then I will give you my top 3 at the moment if I was trying to play a little bit spicy. The top 3, if I was just trying to give you objectively good advice, would be Mbeumo first, Isak second, Wissa third. Probably. It's probably in that order. Maybe not Wissa in third. Maybe I'd maybe put Marmoush in third. So like Mbeumo, Isak, Marmoush as my top 3. That's my objective advice. If I'm then putting a little bit of emotion into this and thinking final 4 game weeks have a bit of fun, I would try and... I think Bowen, De Bruyne, Watkins deserve to be in and involved there. This is so tough. All 8 of these are great captaincy shouts. I will leave it with, I think Mbeumo probably is the best captaincy option, but not by a distance. In my own team right now, me, myself, nothing to do with who I'd like to own or in an ideal world. In my own team, I'm choosing between Bowen and Isak. If I had De Bruyne or Watkins, I'd be very interested in those 2 as well. Sorry for what is possibly the worst ever captaincy section I've ever done. I don't want to make this decision for you. I really don't. This has to be a personal decision. And if you are confused, unsure, and or happy with where you're at, just captain Mbeumo or Salah. So for benching decisions, it's sadly a very similar thing that I always suggest, which is trust yourself, trust your gut feeling, and pick something that you're happy with. But even more maybe than captaincy, I would be tempted to make decisions here based on ownership and based on where you're at right now. I don't recommend you do this for the first 32 game weeks. I think it's a terrible idea to make decisions at the start of the season based on ownership. Get the most points you can, pick the players that you think are the best. But if you are now 30 or 40 points behind, but you think the best player in your team has 100% EO, just risk it. Just risk that you might be wrong. So very much in this case, pick the more differential options or the safer options based on where you're at. But this is just a rough list from start at the top to bench at the bottom in order of what I would be looking at as of right now for these players. The key question that everyone seemingly has, and I myself in my team have, is Rodgers, Mateta, Sarr. Bench 1 of Rodgers, Mateta, Sarr. I'm going to have to do that myself this week. I've got at the moment Rodgers ahead of both of the Palace boys, but I think Fulham are probably a better defence than Nottingham Forest at the moment. So I actually prefer slightly the fixture for Mateta and Sarr. The reason they are lower is I just think that Rodgers is a better footballer than Sarr in terms of if you put them in similar positions, I would back Rodgers to score more often. And with Crystal Palace, the points are spread around a hell of a lot. I just feel like Rodgers is maybe involved in slightly more of what's going on there with Aston Villa. And I feel like I can confirm his minutes more than Mateta and Sarr. Mateta in particular, his minutes are seemingly in the bin. Sarr's are slightly more consistent, but he did get arrested himself. So I just feel like I can't fully confirm Mateta and Sarr's minutes. Whereas Rodgers, you're always extremely surprised if he doesn't make it to the 90th minute or the 98th minute or wherever it is in a game. So I just think for that reason, and also Villa playing at Villa Park as well, we know they are much better at Villa Park. I would have Rodgers slightly ahead of Mateta and Sarr. When it comes to Mateta versus Sarr, at the moment I have Sarr in my starting 11. So you might think, why is Mateta ahead of Sarr? Again, if I'm going objectively, if you didn't tell me their ownerships, didn't tell me that I owned them and just said, who do I think is more likely to get you in a return this week, Mateta or Sarr? It probably is Jean-Philippe Mateta. He's got a possible chance of still being on penalties, and he's a number 9 with greater XG than Sarr. So he's got greater goal threat, possible pens, and if he does get similar minutes, I would expect Mateta to have a greater chance to score a goal. What I like about Sarr, though, is I do project his minutes as being better than Mateta's. He also has a little bit more creativity than Mateta. We don't know that Mateta's on penalties, and Sarr gets an extra point for a goal and an extra point for a clean sheet. So I think when you put it all together, they are very, very similar. That's why they're together on the list. But I think, again, if I was objectively deciding rather than putting emotion in and thinking about ownership, Mateta would be ahead of Sarr, but Sarr is lower owned, and I also just slightly prefer midfielders. So that's very, very close. Other options that people were talking about was mainly like the defence. So I think Munoz is always great. Forest are struggling to create chances. He's so attacking. I quite like Munoz this week. And again, without emotion, without ownership, Saliba is probably a better option than Konsa. In my 11 right now, I'm starting Konsa ahead of Saliba. The reason for that is I don't want to double up on the Arsenal defence, and Saliba in the Arsenal defence will be higher owned than Ezri Konsa. So I'm making a couple of decisions right now, based a little bit on emotion, but also based on ownership too. I recommend you probably do something similar, but I would always usually back the Arsenal defence slightly ahead of the Aston Villa defence if it's just a 1 versus 1 decision. You can glance at this yourself. It comes down to your prediction of minutes, predict the way the games will go, but also where you need to be. How many points do you have to make up? How many points do you have to protect? What are your mini-league rivals doing? Which players do they own? Like, let's say I was first in my mini-league, and my mini-league rival that was 20 points behind had Rodgers and Mateta but didn't have Sarr. I would bench Sarr. I would protect. You're at a stage of a season now, 4 game weeks left, where you can protect. If I was only 5 points ahead, then I'd maybe not protect, and maybe I'd try and differentiate and try and increase the gap. But these are the decisions that you have to make yourself. So yeah, I'm going to have that benching decision to make on the deadline stream tomorrow. As of right now, I've got Mateta benched, but I think it's very, very close. So there were a lot of questions around taking hits. So what I just asked over on Twitter was, what are the hits that people are looking at? So there was lots of questions like, how do you feel about taking hits for the final 4 weeks? The 2 hits that seem to be the most popular, and you might be looking at a variation of this, but it was mainly Sarr to Bowen. Sarr to Bowen was a super popular hit that people were looking at. And then Saka to Mbeumo. So let me try and talk you through my thought process. I will just note, I'm going to say a very similar thing of it depends how much you're chasing or protecting. The very patronising and annoying answer, and I'm going to give it first before giving you a bit more, is do you expect the player that you're bringing in to outscore the player that you're selling by 4 or more points, right? It's a bit of an annoying answer, but it does boil down to that, especially with 4 weeks left. If you think Bowen outscores Sarr by more than 4 points, and the players that you would play instead of Sarr are included in that, and you're starting Bowen every week, and like you have to think about that stuff as well. But if that set of moves and those set of players, including the hit, will outscore the other option by more than 4, then do it. That is as simple as it is. What I would also consider, though, is how bad is the option you're removing versus how confident are you in the player you're bringing in. In an ideal world, and this is more so at the start of the season, but for a -4 hit to feel worth it, I want the player I'm taking out to be either a massive minutes risk or not performing very well, and I want the player that I'm bringing in to be absolutely nailed and or have a very, very high ceiling, a player that I'm very confident will go big. So let's look at Sarr versus Bowen. Sarr's minutes across the coming game weeks might be slightly reduced, especially around the FA Cup in 37. Wouldn't be surprised to see him benched. So minutes-wise, Bowen definitely has that. Performances-wise, I've not seen a massive amount that I desperately love from Sarr in the Premier League. Jared Bowen has looked a lot better. Fixtures-wise, I actually don't mind Sarr's fixtures, but I certainly prefer them for Bowen. So when I go through it like that, my initial instinct when I looked at that and thought is I wouldn't take a hit to sell Sarr to Bowen. But when I go through my framework for making decisions in FPL, Bowen is probably 4 points better than Ismaila Sarr. If you were to then pair that with I'm chasing and need to make up 30 points, even more so. If I was protecting rank right now, Sarr to Bowen for a -4 feels like a horror decision. Sarr's going to be higher owned probably still. It's losing 4 points immediately that you need Bowen to at least get one extra return on Sarr to make back the hit. To make it feel like it's worth it, you probably need 2 more returns for Bowen than Sarr. So if Sarr gets 1 or 2 returns in the next 3 or 4 weeks, you need Bowen to get like 4 or 5 to make that hit feel truly worth it. So yeah, if I was protecting, I probably wouldn't make a move like that. If I was chasing, I probably would. But yeah, when I go through my framework, I like it. Saka to Mbeumo is a very similar thing. Do I prefer the fixtures from Mbeumo? Yes. Does he have better minutes? Yes. Do I really worry about Saka's minutes? Yes. Does Mbeumo have more routes to points? Not necessarily in this case, but he also has penalties and set pieces. The difference with Saka and Mbeumo, I suppose, is that it's a transfer that you'd probably potentially want to reverse. Like, you'd want Saka for 38 against Southampton, but in the meantime, Mbeumo could go massive. So, I wouldn't normally say this, but I think when I look at Sarr to Bowen and Saka to Mbeumo, they probably are both transfers that if you're chasing, do justify a -4 hit. But only if you're super confident in Bowen and Mbeumo. If you're like, oh, I'm not that confident in Bowen, then don't take a -4 hit for him, obviously. Now, if you're asking if I would do it, for Sarr to Bowen for a hit, I wouldn't do it. It's not a transfer that I would do if it was my team. If I go through my framework, it's something that I would say is fine, but I probably, deep down, I just know that I wouldn't take a hit to sell Sarr to Bowen for a hit. I would just start Ismaila Sarr in that case. On Saka to Mbeumo for a hit, I would probably only do this if the player that I'm starting instead of Saka isn't very good. Because like you could just bench Saka this week in an ideal world, right? And then it's not Saka versus Mbeumo, it's whoever you would have started instead. Or, so let's say that player is not very good, or if you plan on captaining Bryan Mbeumo, then it's always worth a hit if you feel like you're bringing in the best captaincy option. I'll leave it there. I feel like I'm doing a terrible job today of answering your questions, but there are so many things you need to think about in terms of where you're at right now and what you want to achieve. But on paper, I don't hate either of them. I think Saka to Mbeumo, for me, feels a little bit better. But if you're chasing, I just say go for it. So there were lots of questions flying in around assistant manager for those that held it for the final 3 or 4 weeks, hoping that there would be a double. Obviously, we don't have that. And in all honesty, the options don't look perfect. So I did feel a little bit bad for those that have held it. So I thought I would do my best to try and help you. What I've done is I've just exported the fixtures over to Excel. And I've gone through, and this is quite a crude way to do it, and I might have made a couple of mistakes here, but I've just highlighted in yellow the teams that currently have a table bonus for that fixture. And of course, for games like 37, 38, by the time you get there, it might not be a table bonus. So for a couple of games, especially in 36, I've selected them and highlighted them in blue if they could be a table bonus depending upon results in Game Week 35. Hopefully that makes sense. The only other colour scheme is runs of 3 games where I think they are nice games and I would happily hold the assistant manager for all 3 games. So I'll just have the assistant manager, not change it, and just hope that they get points. But there obviously isn't a table bonus in most of those. So let's actually start with managers where I think you could hold them for all 3 games. The first is Emery for 36 to 38. We talk about motivation. 2 of those games were against Spurs and United. One's against Bournemouth. Bournemouth will probably be fighting at that point. That's not a great one. But the Spurs and United games, I just think Aston Villa have too much for those 2 teams. So I would expect at least 2 wins out of 3 there. And so I certainly don't hate it. And a lot of people will only have 2 Aston Villa. If you've already got Rodgers and Konsa, though, I would argue that you probably will want Ollie Watkins for Game Week 37, so you might not be able to go out there and get Emery. I actually don't mind Thomas Frank for the next 3 weeks. Like, you'd expect Brentford to beat United, given the rotation, and given that Brentford are looking quite good at the moment. Then it's Ipswich, then it's Fulham, but it's Fulham at home. So the next 3 weeks for Thomas Frank, again, I don't mind that at all. I really don't mind Everton's. So Everton have Ipswich, Fulham, Southampton. Ipswich and Southampton at home. Can't get much better than that. And then at the moment, the Fulham away game is a table bonus game, I believe, in the Premier League. So what you get is Ipswich and Southampton at home and a table bonus game for Moyes. You could definitely do worse than that if you expect Everton to comfortably beat Ipswich and Southampton and have at least a chance against Fulham. It's not awful. Man City is probably the standout, right? If I'm suggesting right now who I would go for as assistant manager, most people don't have 3 City. Do I think Pep Guardiola has a chance of beating Wolves, Southampton, Bournemouth? Yes. I think Wolves and Southampton he should. The only concern would be that Bournemouth game after the FA Cup in 37. But at that stage, you could even switch to a table bonus manager. You could go for like Hurtster against Liverpool, or what other options have you got? Spurs against Villa currently do if you want to go there, or United against Chelsea. I probably wouldn't go for any of those, but you have the option to remove Pep after 2 weeks. But Wolves and Southampton in the next 2, he does feel like one of the better assistant managers. And then also Nottingham Forest. They're not performing at a great standard right now, but Palace, Leicester, West Ham, they're not 3 bad fixtures. That Leicester game in particular, that should be a big win for them. You'd expect a clean sheet too. I think that is the way I would go in terms of selecting not a table bonus manager, but because like this week you've got Hurtster against Newcastle. I would predict Newcastle win. And you've got Glasner against Palace. Sorry, he plays for, he is the manager of Palace. Glasner against Nottingham Forest, but I don't know that I'd want to call that one massively. And then I don't think I'd desperately want Glasner the week after that. I think there are better options. So it's a transfer waiting to happen. And then you've got Vitor Pereira against Man City. That I think those are the 3. I might have missed someone off there, but I think they're the 3. So none of those stand out to me. So if it was me right now, I would probably activate it this week. So lots of people saying, should I wait for 36 or go for... I would just go now, and I would put it on Pep. And if you're not happy with Pep going into Southampton for whatever reason, you can change. But I imagine you would be. So I think you go Pep. And then for 37, I think you have a decision to make about, do you want to go for a table bonus? Do you want to change off of Pep? Or do you just want to stick with him for a home game against Bournemouth? Hopefully that's been helpful for those that have the chip active. Lots of people also asking about triple captain and bench boost. That's simple for me. Go onto a website like Fantasy Football Hub, plan across the next 4 weeks. Who are you captaining in each of the weeks? And which of those looks like the best? Triple captain. It's nice and simple, right? Watkins in 37. You might be on Chris Wood in 36. And Burmo this week, and then Saka in 38. When I look at triple captain, 38 stands out. Bukayo Saka against Southampton away. Love it. Salah against Crystal Palace at home. Love it. A Bournemouth player against Leicester at home. Love it. So if I was going for triple captain, I'd go probably in 38. And then on bench boost, it's the same. I don't know what your team looks like. I can't tell you when to bench boost, but just look at your bench for the next 4 weeks. And whichever week it looks slightly better than the others, play it that week. If they all look bad, just get it done now, because you never know what injuries you might pick up across the final few. So yeah, if you've got chips to play, it's not great. If you've got a free hit as well, it's kind of same thing. Just which week does your team look the worst? If your team looks really bad this week, play it this week. 38 is always fun. So if you're not sure for bench boost triple captain free hit, having a chip active in 38 is always nice because you get that final little boost. Let me know what you're planning for assistant manager. But yeah, if it was me, I'd probably just have Pep for the next 3 weeks. So guys, there we have it. That is my Game Week 35 deadline decisions video. Hopefully it has been helpful. I feel like it's been a little bit more chaotic and less helpful than usual. So sorry if that's the case. It's very late after the United game. I'm buzzing. It's boiling hot in the UK. Getting all of my excuses in. But if you have still enjoyed and you found some use, do smash that like button. Make sure to subscribe as well. I'll see you on the deadline stream later today. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.